My name is Mark Leda, and I produce the videos that you see on my channel, Soft White Underbelly. I've been a photographer since I was 14, and I spent most of my career doing advertising work. So I'm basically helping wealthy corporations become even wealthier. And that I realized as I got older, that was my legacy, and I didn't feel comfortable with that. So I wanted to do something that mattered more in the world. The name Soft White Underbelly came from Winston Churchill, who back in World War II was advising the United States on how best to attack Germany. And he called Italy the soft underbelly of Europe, meaning that was the most vulnerable spot that Germany had to come in from Italy. These videos are meant to create awareness of things that are broken in our country. If we don't look at some of these things, they're just going to continue to grow and get worse and worse. And I believe listening, understanding, accepting, and maybe deciding to do something differently might make a difference eventually, and help the next generation or two of parents raise kids who have more hope, have better role models, have both parents in their lives. That's my hope. That's my aim with this work. It's not to help the addict that's outside my door. Even though I've done that many times. I've spent, over the last 10 years, I've talked with about 1,000 people, and financially, I've probably spent $150,000 helping people with tents, with oh, you need shoes, you need clothes, you need food, you need a cell phone to call your parole officer, you need all these kind of things. Day after day after day, every time I'm down here, I'm bleeding money. But that's not what this channel is about. It has nothing to do with this channel. This channel is purely about what I just said, which is helping our society, helping our government figure out what's wrong with our country, and hopefully build a better system. Like the wealth inequality that goes on here, the education and opportunity inequalities create this stuff. I mean, I talked to some of these kids or some of these people and said that when they were kids, they had no hope of a bright future. There was no chance of it. So that's what I think needs to change. I've helped some addicts. That's a personal thing I do. Has nothing to do with this channel. I'm just showing you some things that are wrong with the country. Sometimes that's just too much to deal with. It's just too much to look at. And I'll watch these videos or listen to these talks, listen to these people, and I'll do it on a more personal level, a more like individual, like I see self-destructive or self-sabotaging behavior in myself, and I'll be able to apply the story that I'm hearing, maybe not as extreme. Some of these stories are really horrifying. But in my childhood, it was nothing like these. But the mechanics are still the same. You know, the stuff that happens to you as a kid ends up affecting the way you believe in yourself, which ends up manifesting as problems with alcohol or drugs or your diet or taking care of your health or your choice of partners or your career choices or your belief in yourself and the education that you decide to get. And there's so many things that we get we're our own worst enemies sometimes. And I think that's an interesting story as well. If you watch these videos, you'll be like, wow, that's what was going on with them. That's why they're doing what they're doing. And then you can kind of apply it to your own life. At least I can. Other times, I just find listening to all these talks like a crash course in empathy. I used to look at homeless people and go, man, why don't they just get a job? Quit the drug, get a job. Problem solved. And now, after hearing all these stories, I realize what these people have gone through in their childhoods, how they're broken, how they never had a chance, they never had hope. And that really has changed. It's built my compassion and empathy for these people like nothing else. And then other times, I can't handle any of the above, and I just watch these videos as like interesting character studies. I get to listen to people that I would never ever meet in my life, and they're interesting and fascinating. And I leave it at that. That's all I can bite off for the day. So, if you have the strength and courage to watch these videos, that's great. And if you don't, I understand, they're not for everybody. But if we're going to change our country, we're going to need to understand why it's broken, what's wrong with it. And here's a really good window into what's really going on. I hope you enjoy my work.
This video is near and dear to my heart for several reasons. Number one, I could relate to some of the things she's been through. Number two, she's from the same area as me and during the same time. And number three, she's still alive. I consider through all that she's been through, just being alive makes her a survivor, an overcomer. Now, with this story, it is a lot of typical things that happen to people who are victim of MK Ultra. You're going to hear a lot of trigger words in this and a lot of stuff. The first portion, you'll hear, the first minute, you'll hear her say a few key words. Preacher, military, and England. Let's get started.
All right, Elizabeth, where'd you grow up? Where are you from originally?
I grew up in Clayton, California.
Clayton is where?
It is up in the San Francisco Bay Area near Walnut Creek, in the East Bay.
Mm-hmm. And tell me about your childhood. You had both your parents as a kid?
Yes. My parents stayed together until my mom actually passed in 2016 from Alzheimer's.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
How would you describe your childhood?
Really stressful, really traumatic, and a lot of drama. A lot of unnecessary drama. My dad, he was a Southern Baptist preacher from Texas. And my mom was from England, a small town in England. And how they got together, he was in the Air Force in England. And that's how they met. My mom ended up taking the Queen Mary when she was 21 years old to Texas and marrying my dad. And I don't think that she really knew him at all. She had no idea what she was getting herself into. Where should I begin? So they had my oldest brother, and then 3 years later they had my other brother, Steve. So there was two boys, and then there was a 10-year gap, and they had me and my little brother. My little brother's 3 years younger than me. My dad, he was very angry. I would say it was beyond anger. It was more like rage. He had a rage issue. And he was very physically abusive. And he was a preacher. And then my mom, she was the principal of the school that was attached to the church. So we were the preacher's kids and the principal's kids too, which was a lot of pressure, especially with what was going on at home. The contradiction that I saw as a young child was just, I couldn't get over it. It was very confusing for me. So, my dad, he would go into a rage over just anything. For example, he would yell at me or hit me for taking my shoes off when I came into the house. Why'd you take your shoes off? And so I would leave my shoes on, and then the next week I would get in trouble for my shoes being on. So nothing made sense. There was no consistency. There was really no method to his madness. So what I learned to do as a young child was to read energy. So I could sense his anger, and either change my behavior or go hide. I learned at a very young age to become very small, almost invisible, and just to have no needs because there was really no room for that in my house. He also was sexually abusive towards me. I don't know if he did things to my brothers. I can't, I know I wasn't there. I was in the house, but I don't know. They claimed that he didn't. So what would happen, like say a Saturday night, I was 6 or 7 years old. Someone would come into my room. It was dark. I didn't know who it was. And they would be on top of me. I couldn't breathe. And then it would be over. And then the next day I would have to go to church and, sit in the pew and watch my dad preach. And by about the end of the church service, I would have such a pounding headache that I could barely see straight. And then by kind of the end of the afternoon, I would just be vomiting. Because I don't think that my body knew how to process what was happening. I think it was too much for me. I was just a little girl. And this went on for years. And unfortunately, my mom, she grew up in England during World War II, and they were dropping bombs, and, her life was in danger. And then she told me she was raped by a neighbor when she was only 10 or 11 years old. And it never got dealt with. She said, this man did this to me, and she was called a liar, and so my mom had her own trauma that was never dealt with. And I think, energetically, the reason my mom and dad came together, it just dovetailed perfectly, is because it just continued the craziness. So she was not, for whatever reason, able to protect us. She did nothing to protect us. And, I think that there's a lot of men that can, fly off the handle and get angry and lose their temper. And the mother's there to, kind of stop, don't do this, But, she didn't do that. So I would say the most painful thing, because I learned to disassociate as a child. Like, I would just leave my body. Especially when my dad would hit me. They called it spanking, but it was like, he would beat us till we'd have bruises on our butts and broken blood vessels and, things like that. And then that way it was a perfect. But the hardest part was watching him beat my little brother. He was 3 years younger than me, and he was like this towhead kid with these big blue eyes, and he was just so beautiful. He was like a little angel baby. And I watched my dad break his spirit. Like, I witnessed it. And it was devastating. It was absolutely devastating. He would turn blue because he couldn't breathe, and my dad just wouldn't stop hitting him. And my mom would just stand there. She would just watch, or she would leave the room, because she didn't want to see it. But I saw it. I saw all of it.
But she didn't feel like she could stand up to him?
I don't think so. I think my mom never felt like she had a choice in her life. I think she felt trapped her entire life and fit into that victim martyr role. And that's a very hard role to give up, because if you give up being a victim and a martyr, you have to take responsibility. And I think for my mom, if she would have confronted my dad about his behavior, she would have had to admit that there was something very wrong. So I think it was just easier to ignore it, or to just, somehow bypass it in her mind. So, my little brother, he suffered a lot. He took a lot. And I think my oldest brother did too. My oldest brother and I, we no longer have a relationship because he's just so difficult, and I think damaged from, what he went through as a child. So yeah, this went on for years, and I don't know how I survived. I think the disassociation really saved my life. Otherwise, I would have probably split and become schizophrenic or something, or just, completely lost my mind. So I learned to survive when I was 12 by using drugs and alcohol. That's when I was first introduced to drugs and alcohol. My oldest brother helped with that because that's what he was using. And I don't think he was trying to hurt me. I think it was his remedy, and so, he knew what I was going through. And then when I was around that age, these boys moved in next door, and one of the boys that moved in next door, he was 3 years older than me, and he became a drug dealer. So he would supply me with drugs. I did LSD. It kind of opened my mind. I think I saw energy for the first time. I realized that there was more than just the physicality of life. It was really beautiful. It really gave me a lot of strength. I used marijuana, I did, alcohol, and then I started smoking crack when I was 14. And for whatever reason, I liked it, but I didn't like it that much. I didn't really like feeling that out of control. So a friend gave me some crystal meth, and that was home. Like, the crystal meth was right. It made me feel in control. I think from all the the trauma in my childhood, my adrenal glands were just so drained that I had no energy. Like, I didn't have natural energy. I was depressed a lot. I would want to sleep. I didn't want to really do much. So when I did crystal meth, it was like someone turned the lights on. I became alive, and I wanted to be around people, and I had like this inner courage, and it was a lot of fun. So I think that's why I didn't become a crack addict. The crystal meth was better. Thank God, really. But, you know, I kind of went in and out of drugs during high school. And what I find really interesting when I look back is, you know, kind of when I hit puberty is when I started using drugs. And instead of getting into guys, I got into drugs because guys just scared me. Like, I was scared of men. I was scared of sex. I had my mom, you know, in one ear telling me, you know, sex is dirty, sex is wrong. Nobody will ever want you if you have sex before marriage. And then, you know, my dad on the other side of me, you know, touching me. So I was very confused. I was very confused. So by the time I graduated high school, I think I was just so fragmented. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I wanted. You know, I was really pretty, and so everybody liked me, and I looked okay. And I think that was part of the problem. Has been a problem in my life is my outer appearance did not match what was going on inside at all. You know, I kind of learned to be a chameleon and fit in with whoever and act how I needed to act to get what I wanted, you know, or to protect myself or whatever. So my first relationship that I actually did get into was with a man named Tom, and my dad's name is Tom. And both my grandfather's names were Tom. And one of my uncles is named Tom. So here was another Tom. And at the time I was seeing him, I was not using drugs. I was drinking. And I didn't know, you know, at 18 years old that you could become addicted to another person. But I became addicted to him, chemically addicted to him, to the sex, to the horrible way he treated me. It kind of re-triggered the childhood stuff. So there was something about it that felt comfortable, even though it was incredibly painful. And that went on for 3 years. And it ended very badly. I actually ended up getting really violent and damaging his home, getting charged with assault and battery. And I fought the case because he had done things to me, and the DA decided to drop it. So I walked away, thank God. But after that, I decided to go to London and live there. I was in college at the time, trying to be in college. I was not a good student. There was a lot of learning disorder issues that I had to deal with, dyslexia and, you know, stuff like that. Because when I was young, I remember, this is how I know I disassociated. I would get test papers back, and there would be an F on them. And the test would be completely blank. And I would never remember the test being in front of me. I was that checked out. So that's sort of how I stumbled around in the world during, you know, my childhood. But when I was in London, you know, of course, I kind of attracted drugs, you know, started doing ecstasy and going to the clubs, and that just felt really good. It felt like, you know, like, here's a good time. Here's people that are nice to me, and I feel really good, and I feel full of love. And when I came home, it was 1994, and I was just craving more of the club scene. So I went to San Francisco and started going to the clubs there, house music, got really into that. And then, of course, the crystal meth use kicked in again. Some of the funnest times and also some of the darkest times of my life. I made some really bad decisions and put myself in very dangerous situations. I really don't know how I survived. I think that, you know, God's always looked out for me. You know.
Are you religious?
I wouldn't say that I'm religious because, you know, religion was really shoved down my throat in an unhealthy way growing up.
That's why I asked.
Yeah, but I definitely believe in God. I do. I don't think that we were, you know, created by happenstance. I just don't. I think that there's a higher intelligence that just creates love, and it just creates and it creates and it creates, and it helps us create. And it never wants to destroy anything, no matter how ugly it is or evil it is. It just wants to love it. And that's where I believe I come from. You know, as I look at myself today in the mirror, it's like, wow, I'm a child of God. And nobody can take that away from me. No amount of abuse or drugs or anything, nothing can take that away from me. That's mine.
What about you? Have you a family of your own, or children, or marriages?
No, I never got married, and I never wanted to have children. I was just telling a friend last night, when I was living in the Bay Area in my 30s, I joined this dating service, and I would, you know, be on a date with a normal guy, and he'd be like, yeah, I want to get married and have 3 kids. And I would just be like, I could feel my heart, like the thought of getting married and having kids was like asking me to run into a burning house. It was just like, it wasn't happening. I was so overwhelmed. I was so overwhelmed by just the normal things that most people do, that they don't even think about it. They just do it. And for me, it was like, oh no. Kids, family. First of all, I knew, I was fully aware of my brokenness, and I didn't want to put another human being through that. I knew. I was still drinking, you know. I was out at a bar one night with my little brother, actually, and a couple of good friends of mine, and I met a man. And we ended up in a relationship for 3 years. And he loved me. He did. He loved me. You know, but I had so much trauma that was just like right under the surface. I could only go, you know, so deep with people, no matter how much they loved me, because I didn't love myself. I felt broken. I felt unworthy. I felt crazy. I felt unlovable.
That's the real core of it all, isn't it?
Absolutely. Is I felt unlovable. Because if my parents treated me like that, there must be something wrong with me. You know, that's how I think I made sense of it. So he and I were together for about 2 years, and then I started using drugs again. Because the intimacy with him really triggered a lot for me. A lot of stuff that was under the surface. And I broke up with him. I ended the relationship, and he was devastated. And I was devastated, and I ended up trying to kill myself. It didn't work, clearly. But I checked myself into the hospital, and I was there for a week and got stable, got on some medication. And then went back out in the world, and I went back to the San Francisco club scene. And within a year, I was, you know, doing meth again every day. I got to the place where I started to get psychosis when I would use. You know, I would just instantly go to crazy or paranoid. So I'll never forget it. It was a Sunday. I was in this apartment in San Ramon, California. And I was looking at this bag of drugs, you know, this bag of meth. And I was like, I can't imagine my life without you, and I can't keep doing this. And so once again, there was that exit door, you know. So I drank like half a bottle of GHB and with some sleeping pills, and I left a note. I wrote a note, you know, just apologizing to everyone that I wasn't doing this to hurt anybody, but it was just because of my own pain. And I woke up the next morning on the floor. I had vomited everything up on my side, thank God, because usually what happens is, you know, people are on their backs, they vomit, and they, you know, it goes into their lungs, and that's how they die. And when I woke up, I didn't know if I was dead or alive.
But you were trying to kill yourself.
I was definitely trying to, yeah, this was not a cry for help. This was, I'm done. And I kind of just looked around, and my body was in a lot of pain. And I called a friend, and I told her what I had done, and an ambulance came, and I went to the hospital again. And this time I was there for 3 weeks, because they knew if they let me out, I was just going to try to do it again. So this time I was there for 3 weeks, because they knew if they let me out, I was just going to try to do it again. So this friend of mine, she contacted my oldest brother, and she just said, your sister's gonna die. Like, you guys have to help her. You know, and I hadn't talked to my dad. I didn't talk to my dad for 13 years. I was so pissed at him. So my oldest brother showed up at the hospital. Actually, my two older brothers, my brother Steve came into town. He lived here in LA, and this was in the Bay Area. And my mom and my little brother, they showed up at the hospital, and the nurse came and said, you know, your family's here. And I said, is my dad here? And she said, no. It's your mom and your three brothers. And I just said, you know, tell them to go away. I don't want to see them. I was pissed that I was alive. I was just pissed. I was so angry. I was like, I can't even kill myself. You know what I mean? It was like, I just felt like I couldn't get what I needed anywhere, you know? So here I am, and I'm angry, and I just want my family to fuck off. So my brother came to the hospital every single day, my oldest brother, until I would talk to him. And finally I talked to him, and he was like, you know, Liz, we're gonna send you somewhere and get you some help. We've decided as a family, you know, you need help. I literally, I didn't know how to live. I didn't know how to just be normal. I think my nervous system was so dysregulated. My whole body was dysregulated. And my brain chemistry was just so out of balance. So I go to this place. Is it okay if I say the name of the place? Okay, it's Sober Living by the Sea. It's still around. So I go there, and I'm terrified. You know, I'm 29 years old, and I look like I'm 12, and, you know, I'm just like a deer in headlights. And there's a man there who was my case worker. He was going to be my counselor, drug and alcohol counselor. And I walk into his office, and I look on his desk, and there's a Dallas Cowboys mug on his desk. And I was like, my dad and brothers were like avid Dallas Cowboy fans. And he turns around and he looks at me and he goes, hi, Liz. And I was like, oh, are you from Texas? And he was like, yes, I am. And I was like, let me guess, you used to be a preacher. And he goes, yeah, I was. I was like, what is going on? I was like, okay. And so I told him the parallels, you know, and he goes, nothing's by accident. His name is David. And he literally loved me back to life. He did. He was like the first man in my life that just wanted to love me and didn't want to touch me or exploit me or, you know, do anything to hurt me. And so for about 6 straight months, I would meet with him every day, and, you know, we would talk about stuff. And I remember one day he was like, he looked at me and I said, what? And he goes, why do you always have to look so perfect? Come in here with your hair messed up one day. You always have to look so perfect. I was like, okay. But I really made a bond with him. And I think what it is, for someone like me, and I'm sure for other people, when people are really good to you and you haven't had much of that in your life, you never forget those people. I've never forgotten him. I just spoke to him on the phone. You know, I'm 47 now. I was 29 when I met him. I just spoke to him on the phone the other day. I love that man, and he was an angel. You know, and there were so many parallels with him and my dad, being from Texas, Dallas Cowboys, ex-preacher. You know, it was just very ironic. So after I got out of there, I stayed sober for a while, and then I moved back up to the Bay Area, started doing hair again. I was a hair colorist for 20 years. And I started using meth again. And I was like, God damn it. Here we go. And I just was like, I can't do this again. I won't do this again. So I decided to go to AA. And I know we're not supposed to talk about AA in press, radio, film, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But I'm going to. I think it needs to come out of the shadows. Stop being such a secret. There's nothing shameful about going to AA. I think it takes a lot of strength to ask for help. So an interesting thing happened when I got sober that time. When I was in Sober Living by the Sea, they were always trying to bust me for like hooking up with guys. Like, who are you hooking up with? We know you get it, because I wouldn't relapse. I never relapsed because I was really strong. Like, once I set my mind to something, I pretty much stick with it. But I never, you know, I was still really scared of guys. But for some reason, when I went to AA, I became sexually active, like promiscuous. And all of a sudden, it kind of came out of nowhere. I was 33 at the time. And I hooked up with a guy who I didn't really like. We didn't belong together, and I got pregnant. And so at 34, I had an abortion. It was actually my second abortion. I had an abortion at 23 when I was dating the drug dealer, and that was kind of a no-brainer. You know, I was addicted to meth. My life was a mess. I wasn't going to bring a child into this world. That was really painful. Looking back now, I feel like that baby should have been here. And, you know, I think the biggest mistake that we make as humans is playing God. And I was playing God. I stopped a soul from, you know, embodying a human existence. And I've, you know, had to live with that. And at the same time, you know, I was just doing the best I could. Again, I was super overwhelmed. The thought of having a child. I mean, the truth is I needed a kid like I needed a hole in my head. But I could have given it up for adoption. I could have done, you know, many other things. So that was super painful. And then I started just turning to like spirituality, meditation. I would meditate for hours because I wasn't going to turn to drugs again. And I saw things in meditation. It was really interesting, the spiritual connection that I was able to make. Whoever was there with me showed me the circle of life, you know, how we never die. It's like we're born and we have this experience and then we leave our human body and become spirit and then it kind of goes again. So it's just, it showed me that there really is no such thing as death. That we've been taught. There's physical death. We leave our bodies, but there's definitely more than what we see here. And I'll share something that's just kind of bizarre. It was November of 2011, and I was working a lot doing hair. And Sunday mornings, I would always just lay in bed. That was just like my thing. I would lay in bed and rest. And I remember it was about 10 a.m., and I was, you know, opening my eyes and closing my eyes and just kind of drifting in and out of sleep. And then all of a sudden, I heard sort of a static electricity noise, like a buzzing, like zzz. And I was like, what the heck? What is that? You know? And so I kind of went to get up and I couldn't. I was completely paralyzed. And so I just laid there and the sound got louder and I couldn't move my body. And as I looked to my left side, there was some sort of being standing there. It had shape, but it wasn't solid. And it was very, very tall. And it put something into the side of my head. And I just laid there and I was like, what the fuck is going on? And then as soon as I kind of like started to, you know, I kind of was able to move, it was over. And I ran into the bathroom and I looked at my head and I was like, there was nothing wrong with my head. And I called a good friend of mine who kind of, you know, knew a lot about other beings and aliens and stuff like that. And she was like, oh yeah, that stuff happens all the time. It's no big deal. They were just rewiring your brain. I was like, okay. You know, if I tell people this, they're going to think I'm crazy. She didn't think I was crazy. So I kept meditating and just like astral traveling and going deeper into this other place. And it was the end of February of 2012. And at that point, I was creating so much stillness within myself and in my life that I could hear things, not voices, you know, nothing like that, but I would hear like a soft voice that would talk to me and give me guidance. And I wouldn't notice negative things. Like I can remember being out with a bunch of girlfriends and someone would be rude to me and they'd be like, did you hear that? You know, and I'd be like, what are you talking about? You know, I was just sort of like in this higher level of consciousness. It was really beautiful and it was very much a relief and it wasn't drug induced. So I'm sitting on my floor in my house and I hear this very soft voice that's like, Elizabeth, call your mom. And I was like,
it's very common for those who have been abused to have stories of abduction from aliens and so forth, as well as being able to astral travel, leave their body, and detach. We'll talk about that after. I was going to do more commentary, but I actually have spent more time quiet re-listening then interjecting.
I hadn't talked to my mom in a year. Our relationship was very difficult, and it persisted. So I was like, okay, I'll call my mom. I called my mom, and we made plans to meet that next Monday for lunch. And I realized I had to change our plans. So I called the house, and my dad answered the phone. And mind you, I hadn't talked to him in 13 years. And he answered the phone, and I just said, Dad. And he instantly started to cry. Because, I'm his only daughter, so he knew it was me. And he just said, Elizabeth, I've prayed for the day that you would talk to me again. And whatever I did to you, I'm so sorry. And so we sat on the phone together and cried for a little bit. And I said, Dad, I don't know why I'm reaching out to you guys. I don't know what's going on, and I can't promise you anything, but I want to show up and be a loving presence in your life to the best of my ability. And he said, I'd like that. And so I talked to my mom, and we changed our plans. And the next day I went to work. And then Saturday morning, I'm laying in my bed, and I get a call from my little brother, and he's crying. And I was like, John, this he's a tough kid. He doesn't cry. And he said, Liz, Steve's dead. And Steve was my older brother, not the oldest brother, but the one that lived here. He made quite a life for himself. He became pretty famous, imitating politicians for a living. And I said, what? And he said, yeah, he's dead. They found him. His housekeeper found him on the couch dead. And in that moment, I knew what that voice was. That guidance was telling me, your family's going to need you. And how difficult it would have been to have not spoken to my dad for 13 years and then seen him for the first time because of that. And I just said, thank you, God. Thank you for guiding me. And I was so grateful that I listened. That I listened to that voice. So I got out of bed, and I just said, you know what? This is your time to get to suit up and show up. And I was sober, thank God. I wasn't a mess. I was able to go towards my family and actually be strong for them. And losing my brother Steve, it was a tragic thing, but it was also a very beautiful thing. He lived an amazing life, and the way he died reflected how he lived. He just passed away on his couch. He laid down to take a nap. And he was 48 years old. And he left behind money, and he blessed my entire family with money. That's why I haven't worked. I haven't had to work. It changed my life. It was like, finally, I have this space that I can just get to know myself. That's what I've been doing for the past, I would say 10, 12 years, is just exploring, healing, getting to know other people, learning how to love. That's been a big thing, is learning how to love, learning how to be in relationship with others. So I thank my brother. He was an angel. He is an angel. He's here right now. I can feel him. So, I walked through his passing, and then shortly after, my mom came down with Alzheimer's. She couldn't handle, what had happened. Steve was her everything. And so she lost her mind and died 4 years later from Alzheimer's. And I remember my brother calling me saying, Liz, Mom hasn't had food or water in 5 days. So I think it's time, So I drove up to the Bay Area, and I wasn't prepared for what I was going to see. Someone who's skeletal, who's dehydrated, who hasn't had food, who's, gasping for air. And my dad and my brother, they left the room so that I could have some time alone with her. And for a moment, there was a split second where I was like, oh my God, am I going to end up where she is? Because she's my mom, And I just said, no, you're not, because you've chose a different path. I've chose to face myself. And she didn't. And this is where she ended up. And I just told her, I looked at her, and, she was in a morphine haze. I just said, Mom, I love you, and I forgive you for everything. And I just want you to go and be in peace, because it's never going to happen here. And the next day she passed away. So it was a lot. It was a lot. And that was really hard for me. I didn't really know how to process my mom's death, because we weren't close. We didn't like each other. So unfortunately, after her funeral, I became a little bit self-destructive, and I went on like a three-day binge. And about a month after that, I became severely depressed. I think I was just suppressing all the grief and all the anger and everything. And so I checked myself into the hospital. This was in 2016. And I was sitting there with a doctor, and I said, I really don't want to go on medication again. I've been down that road. I'd been off of medication for about 8 years. And she's like, well, look where you're at. You've kind of run out of options. So I decided to go on medication, and I take 10 milligrams of Lexapro, and whatever that is in that stuff, it corrected the imbalance. Like within a matter of hours, I felt better. I walked out of the hospital a completely different person. And I've been really, really stable and happy since then. I've been able to deal with life on life's terms. I'll be honest, I'm not sober anymore. What's really interesting, like, I think that there was an 8-year period where I was completely abstinent from everything. And I needed that time. I needed that time to heal myself and to heal my brain. And now I'm able to have some wine if I want some wine. It's not like I want to go hurt myself. So the way I explain that to people is I had no point of reference of what it felt like to feel good before I used drugs and alcohol. So that was my point of reference of feel good. And then when I became sober, in that 8-year period, I discovered what it was like to just feel good naturally. So now I have that point of reference, and feeling good naturally without anything in your body is the best feel good ever. Like, it's the best. Because there's no coming down, there's no hangover, there's no guilt, there's no self-destruction in that. That's just how God designed me, all of us. We all just want to feel good. So in the last 5 years, I decided to go back to school. I went to a place called the University of Santa Monica. It's a school of spiritual psychology. I did their 2-year program. And when I was there, it was so painful. I mean, I really faced a lot of pain in a different way. I mean, years before, this kind of took it to another level. And it really changed me. It made me a better person. It made me a stronger person. And it taught me how to listen to others and just hold space for other people, because really that's all we need, is just to be seen and heard. Yeah, it was life-changing. It was great.
In your life, what would you say is the most important thing you've learned?
To accept what is and to love.
Honestly, I had every intention of adding more commentary, but it was too difficult. Yes, I couldn't do it. So this is the best I can put together right now. It's very common in situations where there's abuse that you run to either drugs for mind altering to escape the reality, or to mentally leave your body and go somewhere else so that you don't have to physically experience the trauma. But then that creates problems because you lose parts of yourself in time because your body and your mind are not in alignment. It's not shocking that her father was in the military, because a lot of mental mind programming was done by our military. And as far as England goes, most of us know the connections. You heard her say about with her mother, Her mother has Alzheimer's, brought about by her own disease, as in she wasn't able to mentally cope with the situation, so she mentally checked out. So that's an example of people bringing death upon their own self by not acknowledging the dis-ease within their body and taking accountability for it and moving out of it. Instead, she decided to continue to mentally run, which ended up being her own demise. I could more than relate to the part about having to project yourself out to check out the emotions of people in the room so that you knew how to best behave, so that you didn't catch the abuse from the gaslighting narcissist. Because a narcissist, no matter what, if they want to abuse you, it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. However you answer makes no difference, because in their mind, they had already made up their mind that you were going to be the scapegoat no matter what. So you were going to catch these hands or this abuse regardless of if you were accurate. Someone abused will very often make themselves very tiny. You make your own self small so that you are not a target. See, because if you stand off into the corner and let them just do their own thing, your prayer is that they don't see you hunched in the corner hiding. So you learn to minimize your needs, minimize yourself, your whole being, to where you not only mentally don't exist, but you barely physically exist. So coming out of that is a very hard process. I commend you on coming out of that. Me, you, all of us, because we can do it together. So this is your reminder. You are amazing. You are not small. You do not need to minimize yourself, your feelings, your beliefs, and your needs. They are equally as important. So don't let anybody tell you or make you feel small. Not even yourself, because more times than not, we're our own worst critic. So instead of criticizing yourself, how about you teach yourself acceptance, moving forward, and new techniques, and knowing that you are indeed a true being, one that's supposed to be here. You're a true soul. You have one, and you can become whole. If you're not whole all the way, as in you're not fully mentally integrated, keep working on it. If you are mentally integrated, phenomenal. Help people. Help people to become whole by sharing your testimony. That's your role.
The first stage of grooming is identifying the victim. As a sexual predator, they could pick this based on the age or the way a child or teen or adult looks, or it could even just be vulnerable traits. It could be that the parents aren't around. It could be that we have really low self-esteem or have just moved there and are trying to make friends. There could be a lot of different reasons and ways that they identify a victim. And the second stage is gaining trust and access. And I don't want you to think that when someone's trying to gain our trust or access to us, that it's going to be done in an overt fashion. Often, the sexual predators are very suave and smooth and may just offer a helping hand. Like, oh, I'll help put your bag in the bus for you. I'll help your mom load up the soccer balls from the soccer game. Or, oh, I'll come over and help tutor you for that. They'll try to do small things that seem quote unquote normal in relationships as a way to gain your trust. And so know that this isn't an overt action. This isn't something that we may notice right away, but it's done as a way to help our parents trust them if we're a child, and that's how they gain access to us, or have us trust them so that they're like a normal adult in our, unit, whether it's our family and extended family and friends. We think of them in a very trusting and normal fashion. The third stage is becoming important to the child or adult and giving them something that they need. This could be through manipulation, by telling the person that they're the only one that understands them and they're the only one that can help them. This could also be with children. They find they give them a lot of gifts. Maybe it's money to go get candy. Maybe it's a toy that they couldn't get otherwise, or certain equipment they needed for sports that their parents couldn't afford. They'll try to give them something or become so important and necessary in this person's life that they feel like they can't live without them, or that they need to keep them around. The fourth stage is they will begin isolating you, meaning that they may offer you a ride home. Let's say it's a child that we're talking about and their parents always late to pick them up from school. They'll offer to call the parent and take them home instead. Or if you're an adult, they may say, oh, I'll walk you home. It's really late. That's kind of scary. I'd rather be with you. And they do this so that you are obviously isolated. You're with them and you're more vulnerable in those positions. So just be cautious about who you spend time with when there's no one else around. The fifth stage is they'll begin creating secrecy around the relationship. This could be anything from no one would understand what you're going through, or I wouldn't tell anybody that. They'll start to think that you're weird or odd or crazy, or that something's wrong with you. They may also threaten to harm themselves or a pet or someone else that you love in your life if you shared any of the private information you've talked about, or the relationship as a whole. They'll threaten harm or revealing secrets as a way to keep you tied to the relationship. The sixth stage is sexualizing the relationship. And just like we talked about before when it comes to gaining trust, this won't always be done in an overt way at the beginning. But even the smallest thing, like putting an arm over the shoulder, may give the predator some kind of sexual gratification. And these first stages of sexualizing the relationship could just be putting a hand on the knee, rubbing them on the back, linking arms and walking together. It could be things that we don't consider to be sexualized, but the predator is taking it that way. They will also set up scenarios where it's normal to be naked around one another, such as getting ready to go swimming, or being in a locker room and changing before or after a game, or even going to a spa. They'll set up these types of scenarios so that you become desensitized to being naked around them because you don't think it's something that makes you vulnerable or is dangerous. In the last portion of this stage, if this is a child that is the victim, they will play on a normal child's curiosities and questions about the body and use that to further the sexual relationship and move it into actual sexual touch. And the seventh and final stage of grooming is controlling the relationship. Because once the sexual abuse is happening, all of the things that they've set up, they'll use that as leverage to keep us held in that relationship, whether it's financial. Remember I said they might buy us gifts or give us things we couldn't otherwise get for ourselves. It could be that they have more power over us because they're a boss or a teacher or someone in our life who can, harm us in such a way. It could also be emotional support. Remember, if they're telling us that they're the only ones that can understand us and everybody else will think something's wrong with us. They've tried to keep everything we do together a secret. And because of all of that swirling around, there can be so much shame associated with this. Because at this point, the person who's been groomed feels like they're unlovable or that they should be embarrassed and they brought this on themselves. But I want you to know that that is not the case. All of these different stages are stages of manipulation and stages of abuse. And know that if you have found yourself in a situation like this, you didn't ask for it. You are not to blame. Nothing that happened is your fault. We find the best way to process through this shame. And first thing that I want to say is that the truth about childhood sexual abuse or sexual assault at any age, the most common response is actually to be hypersexual. And so I just want to put that out there, that you are not in the minority, you're actually in the majority. So know that you're not alone. And I know a lot of you out there watching this video who haven't gone through this are thinking, isn't that like the opposite? Isn't that counterintuitive? Why would someone who was harmed sexually as a child or at some point in their life then turn around and be hypersexual? Why would they do that? Why would they hurt themselves with the very thing that hurt them in the beginning? And there are many reasons that we do it. The first is that it's a way to regain control, to take it back. Many of my clients have told me that they will be hypersexual. They'll put themselves in dangerous sexual situations because it's their way of saying, it's my body, I decide, I do what I want. And it's almost like they get to reverse the role. Instead of feeling like someone has control over them and can do whatever they want to them, and even them saying no isn't stopping it, they get to choose and they get to have as much sex as they want. The second reason many people become hypersexualized is validation. Imagine if we were sexually abused as children. We were raised in that environment. Through that time in our formative years, we were shown that maybe the only way we got one-on-one attention was with sex. Maybe the only time we were really told that we were loved was through sex. Maybe that's how we knew we were worthwhile and we were important and all of those things. Maybe that was something we were told while we were being sexually abused. So you can see how if that's what's happening in our formative years, even into our teens, we will associate love, support, validation with sex. Therefore, in order to get what we all need, right? We all need love, validation, and support. We will then turn to sex to fill that need. And if you're new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe and make sure you click that bell icon on my homepage so that you get notified. I've heard from a lot of you that you're not being made aware of the videos when I put them up. So clicking that bell and turning on your notifications should change that. But the third reason that I know of in my experience is chemical dependency. And that sounds like we're talking about addiction, and we kind of are. Sex can release those feel-good hormones. You know how I've talked about different chemicals in our brain like dopamine and norepinephrine and all those things that swirl around and make us feel really good? Sex releases those. Therefore, if we've been hypersexualized, we're already maybe used to being abused and being sexualized for many nights, maybe every night growing up. When we get older, we still seek out that same feeling. And that's why when you talk about treatment for this, the next stage then is like dual treatment. We need to treat potentially the addiction and that like yearning for that feel good, that dopamine, that serotonin, that norepinephrine that gets released. We may seek that out, so we need to deal with the addiction, the sex addiction. And secondly, we have to heal from our trauma. And you know I did those videos with Alexa.
Hypersexuality is one of the symptoms that you can see in the manic phase of bipolar disorder. And for more on bipolar disorder, check out the playlist that I have in the corner. What we consider hypersexual is somewhat relative. One person who has the desire to have sex every day may seem hypersexual to the person who's good for just once a month. But that's not really what this is about. When a person becomes manic, it's like a car engine that's just idling too high. And everything is moving faster. Your thoughts, your impulses, and this affects your judgment and your decision making. And your sexuality is just one of those parts of your identity. It's a basic, primal desire that everyone has. Everyone has some degree of sexual desire. You may suppress it because of social conventions and expectations, but it's there. And it's similar to your basic desire to attach to people. Everyone has some degree of need to attach to someone else. Okay, so when a person becomes manic, it's like your engine is tuned up and these primal needs and desires increase. It's like having an increased appetite for different things, not just sex, but lots of things. And if you combine this increased appetite with fast-moving thoughts, poor impulse control, poor insight and judgment, what do you get? You get unrestrained gratification seeking. And there's different ways that this can look. It can look like someone who decides that they're going to start a new company that solves a unique problem that no one else can solve. And so you withdraw all of your money out of your savings and invest it into some process that's going to kickstart your company and help you just change the industry. Or you can have the urge to speak to someone important in your life about something, and you just have to speak to them right now and get this question answered, even if it means pulling this person out of an important meeting because you just really need to speak to them right now. Can you get a picture in your mind of what this person may be feeling? So with hypersexuality, you start with your basic sexual needs, and then there's this ramped up energy around it that creates this urge that you just can't control. It's like having an itch in the middle of your back, and you find something to scratch at it, and it feels kind of good, but there's just still this one spot that you just can't find, and it's still itching. So you're scratching all around, but this one spot is still there. I use that example because the scratching feels good, but you're also over-scratching parts of your body. So the inability to get it all satisfied feels bad. So you feel good and bad simultaneously. If you look from the outside as a person not affected by mania, it may just seem like the manic person is just having fun. Good for you that you've got all that energy. But it's not all fun. And for many people, it doesn't feel that good. Or the feel good is very temporary. And many people will have a lot of shame when the mania goes away because unlike a sexual addiction, the hypersexuality of mania is only present during the manic episode. So after that passes, they go back to their usual behavior, whatever that was. And often with bipolar disorder, the opposite mood follows. So mania will be followed by depression, either immediately or sometime later. So if a person who was hypersexual while they were manic then gets depressed, their sex drive is shot. And they're completely the opposite. In fact, this may be a period of mourning the losses and the damages that they created during their manic phase. What are the ways that people can behave when they become hypersexual? It can be increased sexual activity either with your partner or multiple partners or even strangers. A person who would otherwise never consider being unfaithful could have an affair during this period, not only because of the increased urges, but the poor judgment, the trouble controlling their impulses, and even a misperception of their world and what's going on around them. It's like they can just get this tunnel vision that and nothing else exists except them and the other person or other people. But not everyone has sex with multiple partners. Some people masturbate excessively, and I say excessively because it is considered normal to masturbate. But some people will just lose track of time watching pornography and masturbating all day. Here's a more subtle way it can look, though. Some people can get caught up in their sexual fantasies such that they neglect their responsibilities, or it distracts them from getting their work done, so they're not performing well at work or at school. And these are just some examples of how you could have hypersexuality that's problematic, but it doesn't involve having sex with someone. So what do we do about this? The main solution is to treat the episode. As I mentioned before, if the hypersexuality is from mania and not from a sexual disorder, when the mania dies down, the hypersexuality also dies down. You don't become non-sexual. Your baseline sexuality is just reined back in. So it's important to recognize early signs of your manic episodes. Even if you're fairly stable on your medication, you can still have breakthrough episodes. So this can be important to look for early signs to see your doctor to have your medication tweaked. Not sleeping and hypersexuality are often early signs for people. And sleep deprivation in mania is like lighter fluid on a fire. It's one of the ways that manic episodes can escalate. If you have a partner and you have an affair during an episode, you should get some couples therapy so that you and your partner can better understand what happened. Then the burden is on you to keep yourself well and to continue to look for the early signs so that you don't repeat the behavior. Because in the throes of a manic episode, the judgment goes out the window. And it's easy to just forget the damage that was done from the last time. It's like that movie Groundhog Day, where the guy gets stuck in this loop and the day just keeps repeating itself. For you, if you're not proactive, each manic episode could be just another day starting all over again. And you may be able to deal with that, but the people in your life won't. Okay, I hope this helped you understand what's behind